welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I was halfway through my shift at the station when the first alert came through. It started as a routine night, the late-night AM radio shift in a quiet town where nothing ever happened. My name's Elliot Graves, and I run WZRX 107.3, the only station that still broadcasts around here. The kind of place where most of our audience is old truckers, insomniacs, or weirdos who scan the frequencies looking for conspiracy theories. I was half asleep, spinning the same classic rock rotation, when my emergency alert system, AS, console lit up red. At first, I thought it was a weather warning. Tornado season wasn't for another few months, but sometimes we'd get unexpected storms. But when I glanced at the screen, my stomach twisted. Emergency alert system, national alert. Severe warning in effect. Do not look at the sun. Stay indoors. Keep windows covered. Further information to follow. I read it again and again. The hell? I muttered, rubbing my eyes. These alerts were usually generated by FEMA or the National Weather Service, and they followed a standard format. Flooding, storms, amber alerts. But this didn't make any sense. The automated voice cut into my broadcast, overriding my playlist. A voice everyone recognized, the cold, robotic monotone of the EAS. This is an emergency alert. Repeat, this is an emergency alert. All residents must remain indoors. Do not look at the sun. Do not attempt to observe it. Further instructions will follow. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The message repeated 3 more times. Then silence. I switched my microphone on. Folks, this is Elliot on WZRX. I'm sure you all heard that, some kind of emergency alert. I don't have any more details right now, but I'll keep you updated as soon as the alert triggered again. The robotic voice overrode me mid-sentence. Avoid looking at the sun. Stay inside. This is a national emergency. That wasn't normal. Alerts don't repeat like that. I grabbed my phone. No missed calls, no text warnings. Nothing. If this was a real national emergency, I'd expect some kind of notification from the station manager or local authorities. Instead, I had one message from my friend Tucker, a late-night trucker who listened to my show on the road. Tucker, dude, WTF is this? Is this a test? 12:17 a.m. Tucker, bro, call me. You hearing this? 12:18 a.m. Tucker, something's wrong. Real wrong. 12:21 a.m. My stomach twisted. Tucker never freaked out. I dialed his number. It rang and rang. And then, this number is no longer in service. A shiver ran through me. How? I had just gotten those texts minutes ago. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the silent emergency alert console. And then, it triggered again. 12:30 a.m. The alert won't stop. By now, I had shut off the station's automated overrides, but the EAS kept forcing its way through. It was like something was bypassing the normal system, overriding me every few minutes. This is an emergency alert. Do not observe the sun. Do not attempt to record it. Do not look directly at the sky. Further information will follow. What did it mean? It was the middle of the damn night. No one was looking at the sun. I tried calling other stations. No answer. The only thing I got was garbled static or distant, distorted voices that sounded wrong. Like they were speaking English but in an unnatural, warped tone. That's when I checked the news. I opened my laptop, pulling up major news sites. Nothing about an emergency. No breaking news. No presidential address. No warnings about the sun. But then I found something else. r/conspiracy theories. What the hell is this alert? U/Highway Ghost 87. Anyone else hearing this weird alert about the sun? My entire town just got the message. No news about it anywhere. /void signal. Yeah, I got it too. Seattle area. The voice was weird, like it was glitching. /northern outpost. I'm in Alaska. It's nighttime. Why the hell would they warn us not to look at the sun? This isn't normal. Hundreds of comments. People from all over the country, Texas, Maine, Florida, even Canada, all saying the same thing. The alert was national, and no one knew why. That's when the first video appeared. It was a 30-second clip uploaded by a user in Arizona. The video was grainy, filmed through a window. The caption read, "My neighbor walked outside after the alert. He looked up. In the footage, a man stood in his driveway, motionless. The camera zoomed in. The man's head was tilted back, staring straight at the sky. He wasn't moving. Something was wrong with his face." The video cut to black. I swallowed hard. My radio console flickered. Another message forced its way through. "Do not look at the sun." This time, the voice was different. It wasn't robotic. It wasn't automated. It was breathing. A ragged, shallow breath. A voice that sounded like it had been repeating this message for hours. And then, something even worse. The message repeated again. But this time, I heard someone else whispering behind it. Not a glitch. Not static. A voice. Speaking right behind the alert. I cranked up the volume. The whispering grew louder. My hands went clammy as I listened. It was saying my name. "Elliot. Elliot. Look outside." I froze. My station has no windows. Someone was inside the building with me. A cold sweat broke out across my back. Someone was inside the station with me. The whisper on the emergency alert hadn't been part of the message. It had been something else. A voice speaking my name behind the broadcast. I held my breath, straining to hear anything in the silent station. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The security cameras at the front door showed nothing but an empty parking lot. Slowly, I reached for the desk drawer, feeling around for my pocket knife. My fingers wrapped around the handle just as a soft creak echoed from the hallway leading to the transmitter room. I wasn't alone. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The hallway was dark, too dark. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body was frozen. Then something moved, a shape in the shadows. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. No one was there. The door to the transmitter room stood slightly ajar, swaying as if it had just been pushed open. I swallowed hard. I hadn't left it open. I forced myself to move, creeping toward the door. My footsteps sounded too loud in the silence. The emergency alert console flickered, casting strange shadows along the walls. I reached the doorway, took a breath, pushed it open. Inside, the transmitter equipment hummed like normal, blinking with green and red lights. The rack of audio processing gear stood untouched. No sign of anyone. Then I noticed it. The radio signal monitor, which normally displayed the active AM/FM bands, was fluctuating wildly. The numbers were scrolling too fast, as if something was rapidly cycling through frequencies. And on one of them, I heard it again. That whisper, "Elliot, look outside." My stomach lurched. I slammed the monitor off, backing out of the room. I needed to get out of here. I grabbed my phone to call 911. No service, no Wi-Fi either. The whole station was cut off. That's when the emergency alert triggered again. But this time, the message had changed. 12:45 a.m. The new alert. The robotic voice crackled through the speakers. But something was wrong. It sounded distorted. "This is an emergency alert. Be advised. There are missing persons in your area. Missing persons. Do not attempt to search for them. Do not acknowledge them. Stay indoors." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just about the sun anymore. I ran back to my desk, flipping through radio channels. Every station was dead air. No music, no news, nothing but the low hiss of static. Except one. A weak, flickering AM frequency came through, breaking up with interference. A man's voice, shaking, desperate. "If anyone hears this, please, I need help. My brother, He looked outside. Oh God, he's not the same. He won't stop staring. The signal cut out abruptly. I gritted my teeth, feeling a gnawing dread settle in my gut. The missing people. I had to get out of here. Now, 1 a.m., the road is empty. I locked up the station and sprinted to my car. The parking lot was dead silent. The streetlights flickered with an eerie yellow glow, casting unnatural shadows across the pavement. I got in, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, but my headlights, they barely illuminated anything. It was like the light itself was being swallowed by the darkness. I pulled out onto the road. No cars, no pedestrians, not even the usual stray dog that hung around the station at night. I passed by the 24-hour gas station on Main Street. Normally, Old Man Wiggins would be manning the counter, reading a newspaper, but the store was dark. The glass doors stood wide open. A single pack of chips lay crushed on the floor inside. Something wasn't right. I kept driving. My fingers were tight on the wheel, my eyes darting to the sky out of instinct. The moon was there. The stars were there, but something about them looked wrong, like they weren't quite in the right places. I turned onto Maple Avenue, where Tucker's apartment was. If anyone could tell me what the hell was going on, it was him. But when I pulled into his complex's parking lot, my stomach dropped. His truck was there, door wide open. The driver's seat was empty. I killed the engine and stepped out, my breath fogging in the cold night air. The entire complex was silent. No TVs, no movement, not even the sound of insects. I approached the truck carefully, my pulse pounding. A cell phone lay on the pavement just outside the driver's side door. The screen was still on. A half-typed message. Don't look at them. A low creak came from somewhere inside the apartment complex. I turned my head toward the sound, and then I saw him, Tucker, standing in the second-floor hallway. But something was wrong. His head was tilted back at an unnatural angle, as if he had been looking up at the sky for hours. His mouth was slightly open, and his hands hung limply at his sides. Tucker, I whispered. He didn't move, didn't blink. I took a hesitant step forward. That's when I saw his eyes. They weren't burned. They weren't missing. They were reflecting light, like an animal caught in headlights. But there was no light source. Then he spoke, or rather, something inside him spoke. His voice was wrong, stretched, echoing. You shouldn't be here, Elliot. A wave of nausea hit me. Tucker's mouth was barely moving. The words weren't coming from him. They were coming from somewhere else. And then, in that same distorted, broken tone, he said something that made my blood run cold. You should have never looked at the alert. My body moved before my brain could react. I ran. I jumped into my car, slamming the door shut. My hands shook violently as I turned the key, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't dare look back. As I peeled out of the parking lot, my radio flickered back to life. Another emergency alert. Do not look for the missing. Do not engage with them. Do not acknowledge them. I floored it, speeding into the night, as Tucker's glowing eyes watched me leave. I drove like a madman. The needle on my speedometer pushed past 80, then 90. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Tucker's voice, or whatever had spoken through him, echoed in my head. You should have never looked at the alert. I couldn't shake the image of his glowing, reflective eyes. They weren't human anymore. They had caught the light like an animal's in the dark. But there had been no light. I stole a glance at my rearview mirror. The apartment complex was already fading into the distance. The road ahead stretched into the blackened countryside, empty and silent. And that's when I noticed something terribly wrong. The stars, they were moving, not like the slow drift of constellations across the night sky. They were shifting, crawling across the heavens like something alive. My stomach churned. I rubbed my eyes, convinced it was a trick of exhaustion. But no, they kept moving. Clusters of stars were breaking apart, stretching, merging again in patterns that made no sense. I saw familiar constellations twist into grotesque, spiraling shapes. I swallowed back a wave of nausea. Something was wrong with the sky. A fresh emergency alert interrupted my thoughts. The radio crackled, and that same emotionless robotic voice came through. This is an emergency alert. Avoid looking at the sky. Avoid reflective surfaces. Do not attempt to capture images or recordings. Avoid reflective surfaces. My rearview mirror. My eyes darted to it instinctively. For half a second, I saw myself, but my reflection was wrong. It was still staring at me, even though I had already turned away. My blood ran cold. I reached up and slammed the mirror to the side, turning it away. A choked breath escaped my lips. I had seen my own reflection smile at me, and I hadn't been smiling. 1:30 a.m., the town is empty. I reached the edge of town in minutes, or at least I should have, but the streets were empty. No cars, no pedestrians, no lights in any houses. Even the traffic signals hung dead, their usual red, yellow, green glow replaced by black, lifeless glass. I slowed the car, my stomach twisting into knots. The gas station was deserted. The diner was dark, its neon sign flickering uselessly. I grabbed my phone again. Still no service. I took a deep breath and tried the police station. If anyone was still here, it would be them. I pulled up in front of the building. The windows were dark, but the doors were unlocked. I stepped inside. Silence. No ringing phones. No shuffling of paperwork. Just the sound of the air vents blowing cold, stale air. I moved cautiously toward the front desk. A single coffee cup sat there, still half full. Someone had been here recently. I leaned over the desk, scanning for anything, any sign of life. That's when I saw the security monitors. A row of grainy black and white screens showed different parts of town. Most of them were empty, but on one, the camera facing Main Street, I saw a figure, standing completely still in the middle of the road, staring straight up. My breath caught in my throat. I squinted at the screen. It was a woman. Her face was obscured by shadow, but her posture was identical to Tucker's. Head tilted back, body rigid. I looked at the timestamp. Live feed. She was out there right now. I turned toward the window, my heart hammering. And then I saw her. She was right outside the police station. I hadn't heard her approach, hadn't seen her move, but there she was, her head still tipped back, staring at the sky. And then she started moving, not walking, sliding. Her feet never left the ground. She just drifted forward, without bending her knees, straight toward the station doors. I stumbled back. My breath hitched in my throat. Then she stopped, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, her head began to tilt down. She was about to look at me. I bolted. I turned and sprinted down the hallway, past empty cells and dark offices. My footsteps echoed too loudly. I found the back door, slammed through it, emerging into the alley behind the station. I didn't dare stop running. 1:45 a.m., the blackout. I ran for blocks, through darkened streets, past lifeless storefronts. No movement, no sound. And then all the streetlights went out. A wave of absolute darkness crashed over the town, swallowing everything. My heart leapt into my throat. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a low, droning hum, but it grew. A deep, vibrating frequency that rattled my bones. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. It wasn't sound, it was something deeper, like it was inside me. The emergency alert triggered again. But this time, it wasn't the robotic voice. It was something else. The voice was wet, like it was gargling liquid. It spoke slowly, each word dripping with something thick and unnatural. Do not look at the sun. Do not look at the sky. Do not listen to the missing. I squeezed my eyes shut. The hum was getting louder, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, silence. The power came back. The streetlights flickered on. But when I opened my eyes, the town was even emptier than before. The missing were gone. The sky was still shifting. And worst of all, the stars had formed a new shape. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was looking back. I had to get out. The town was wrong. The stars weren't stars anymore. The missing people had disappeared, but I knew they weren't gone. They were somewhere else, and I wasn't waiting around to find out where. I sprinted back to my car, throwing the door open and slamming it shut behind me. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking as I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. I didn't check the mirrors. I didn't look at the sky. I just drove, fast, straight out of town. At least that's what I thought. 2 a.m., the road that doesn't end. I hit the main highway, the one that led out of town and toward the interstate. I pressed down on the gas, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The speedometer climbed past 70, then 80. I was getting out. I was going to find help, but then a sign passed by on my right. "Welcome to Riverview." My stomach twisted. I had seen that sign before, just 15 minutes ago. I shook my head, swallowing hard. No, that's not possible. I was going in a straight line. I kept driving. The road stretched endlessly ahead. My headlights barely pierced the darkness, as if the night itself was pressing in. Then, the same sign, "Welcome to Riverview." I slammed the brakes. The tires screeched, my car skidding to a stop in the middle of the empty highway. I turned my head, staring at the sign. It was the same one, the same graffiti in the corner, the same bent metal post. I had just looped back into town. No. I gritted my teeth, turning the car around. I tried another route, a back road, the old dirt path that led through the woods toward the next county over. For a few minutes, it looked like I was making progress. The trees thickened around me, the air growing colder. The road twisted, branches scraping against my windshield. Then, the sign, "Welcome to Riverview." I almost screamed. I wasn't leaving. I couldn't leave. The town wouldn't let me. 2:30 a.m., the message that wasn't for me. I killed the engine, sitting in silence. My pulse pounded in my ears. I had to think. Every escape route led back here. The roads were looping. It was like the town had been cut off from the rest of the world. And then, the emergency alert came back. My radio flickered on by itself, static hissing through the speakers. But this time, it wasn't the robotic voice. It wasn't even English. The voice that spoke was deep, inhuman, a guttural, wet sound, like something speaking through layers of liquid. And yet, I understood it, not with my ears, with something else. The words slithered into my brain like worms burrowing through my thoughts. "It is almost awake." I felt a sharp pain behind my eyes. I clutched my head, gritting my teeth. "Do not interfere." A sudden pressure built inside my skull, like something was trying to push into my mind. "The sky will open soon," I gasped, reaching for the radio dial. I tried to shut it off, but the knob wouldn't turn. The voice continued, slow and deliberate. "Do not look when it arrives." I yanked the power cable from the dashboard. The radio shut off, and the moment it did, I felt something watching me, not from outside, from inside the car. A breath of cold air brushed the back of my neck. I turned, and there, in my rearview mirror, I saw myself, but my reflection wasn't moving. It just sat there, smiling. I slammed my fist into the mirror, shattering it. Glass rained onto the dashboard. The reflection was gone, but I knew it was still there, waiting. 2:45 a.m., someone who knows. I wasn't alone anymore. As I sat in the driver's seat, my pulse still racing, I saw movement in the distance. A figure walking along the side of the road. Not like the missing. They weren't staring up. They were moving like a normal person, a survivor. I hesitated only a moment before throwing the car into gear and rolling toward them. As I got closer, I saw who it was. An old man, ragged clothes, eyes sunken and bloodshot. He was muttering to himself. I pulled up beside him, rolling down my window. "Hey!" My voice was hoarse. "Hey! Do you know what's happening?" The old man stopped walking, and slowly he turned to look at me. His eyes darted toward the sky, then back to me. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. I swallowed. "Yeah, I figured that part out. What the hell is going on?" He took a slow, shaky breath. "It's coming." "What is?" He didn't answer right away. He looked past me, his gaze lingering on my shattered mirror. Then he nodded like he understood something. "You heard the message, didn't you?" he asked. My stomach clenched. I didn't answer. The old man let out a slow sigh. "I heard it too. Years ago." I blinked. "What?" I tried to leave, tried to tell people. His voice shook. But the town doesn't let us go. My chest tightened. What do you mean, years ago? He turned his head slightly, staring into the dark road ahead. Then he whispered, the first message went out in 1971. I felt my breath catch. That's impossible. But deep down, I knew he was telling the truth. Something had been happening here for decades, and now it was getting worse. The old man's words echoed in my head. The first message went out in 1971. I stared at him, heart hammering. That's impossible. There weren't emergency alert systems like this back then. He shook his head. Not like this, no. But there was a message. The first one wasn't through television or radio. It was something else. The wind howled through the empty road. Somewhere in the distance, a streetlight flickered. I swallowed. How do you know all this? The old man sighed, rubbing his temple. His skin looked pale, almost waxy under the dim light. Because I was here when it happened. 3 a.m., the first incident. He told me everything. Back in 1971, Riverview was just a quiet town. Nothing special. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors by name. Then one day the sky changed. There was no warning, he muttered, staring at the cracked pavement. No sirens, no announcements. Just one day, the sun rose and something was off. I leaned in. Off how? He hesitated. Then, it was too big. My breath hitched. The sun was huge in the sky. Too close. Too bright. People said it hurt to look at even for a second. Like it was burning into their eyes. A chill ran down my spine. What did people do? I asked. The old man's face darkened. Some ignored it. Went about their day, pretending nothing was wrong. Others panicked. We had one local scientist back then, a retired professor. He tried to figure it out. His voice lowered. He said it wasn't just the sun. The stars were wrong too. I stiffened. The moving stars. I had seen them. The old man took a deep breath. Then the message came. I held my breath. It wasn't on the radio, he continued. It was in our heads. A sharp coldness settled in my gut. The voice just appeared one night. Everyone in town heard it at the same time. Told us not to look at the sun. Not to look at the sky. It said. He trailed off, swallowing hard. I leaned in. What? He clenched his jaw. It said. It sees you. A shiver crept down my spine. What happened after that? I whispered. The old man closed his eyes, as if trying to block out the memory. The town changed. People vanished overnight. Sometimes a whole family would be gone. Their house left just as they had last used it. Meals still on the table, clothes still drying on the line. I swallowed hard. Did anyone try to leave? He let out a bitter chuckle. Yeah, dozens of us. But the roads, he shook his head. They always brought us back. My stomach twisted, just like they had for me. The last people who stayed, the old man continued, stopped looking up altogether. They boarded up their windows, avoided mirrors. Some even gouged out their own eyes. I felt sick. They thought if they couldn't see it, it wouldn't see them. His voice dropped lower. But they were wrong. I swallowed hard. So what happened? How did it end? The old man's hands trembled. One day, the sun went back to normal. The sky settled. The message stopped. But the people who were taken, he looked at me with hollow eyes. They never came back. 3:15 a.m., the town is closing in. I sat there in stunned silence. If this had happened before, why wasn't it in the history books? Why had no one outside the town ever heard about it? The old man seemed to read my thoughts. They covered it up, he muttered. Not the government. Something else. I didn't want to ask what he meant. Instead, I took a deep breath. You survived, he nodded. Barely. I was young then. I followed the rules. I stayed inside, kept my head down. His eyes flickered toward me. But you've already broken the rules. A lump formed in my throat. You looked at the alert, he said. You saw the sky change. And worst of all, his voice dropped to a whisper. You heard the second message. I clenched my jaw. What happens to the people who hear it? He didn't answer. I already knew. The missing. The ones who stood in the streets, staring at the sky, unmoving. The ones whose eyes had glowed like Tucker's. My breath hitched. I could still feel it inside me. The words, the message, the thing that had spoken wasn't done with me yet. Then, from somewhere down the street, a low, droning hum. I froze. The old man's face turned white. "Not again," he whispered. "Not again." The sound grew, a deep, vibrating frequency that rattled my bones. And then, another message. The radio in my car flickered back to life, and a voice not human, not machine, spoke. "It is awake," I gasped, clutching my head. The words were inside my skull. "Do not let it see you." The old man grabbed my arm, his grip iron tight. "We have to hide. Now." I turned my head, and that's when I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, standing in the streets, silent, motionless, their faces tilted up, staring at the sky. 3:30 a.m. The sky is opening. The old man yanked me toward a building. We stumbled inside, locking the door behind us. The windows were already boarded up. The place smelled like dust and old wood. He shoved me against the wall, breathing hard. "Don't make a sound." Outside, the hum grew louder. Then, a deep, thunderous crack ripped through the sky. I clenched my teeth. It sounded too close, too vast. And then, I felt it, a pull, like something beyond the clouds was dragging at my mind. My hands trembled. Something was opening. The old man shut his eyes tight. I tried to resist, but my body wasn't listening. Somewhere deep inside me, I wanted to look. I needed to see. My hands moved on their own, reaching for the boards covering the window. A tiny sliver of sky peeked through. I could see something moving, something vast and unfathomable, and it was looking right at me. I shouldn't have looked. The old man had warned me. The message had warned me. But something inside me had needed to see, and now couldn't look away. 3:33 a.m., the first glimpse. Through the tiny crack in the boarded-up window, I saw something moving. Not in the sky, beyond it. It was like looking through a hole in the world, a rip in the fabric of what I had always thought was reality. There was something behind the sky, massive, unfathomable, shapes shifting and writhing, too large to comprehend. And then it blinked, not with eyes, at least not in any way I understood. But I felt it. I felt it seeing me, and I felt my mind unraveling. 3:34 a.m., the pull. A sharp pain shot through my skull, like a hook had been lodged into my brain and was pulling. I gasped, stumbling backward. My hands trembled, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I could still see it. Even with my eyes shut, it was burned into my vision. The thing behind the sky, and it wanted me to keep looking. My body moved on its own. I stepped toward the window. My fingers reached for the boards, clawing at the edges. A voice whispered in my mind, "Do not resist." My breathing hitched. It wasn't the same voice as before. This one was closer, more insistent. "You are already seen." I gritted my teeth, trying to fight it, but the pull was getting stronger. The old man grabbed me. "Shut your damn eyes." His voice was desperate. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to turn away, but it was still there. The shape, the movement, the unbearable presence of it pressing down on my mind. I knew, deep in my bones, that if I opened my eyes again, I wouldn't be able to look away. 3:36 a.m., the sky is breaking. The old man yanked me back, forcing me into a chair. I barely heard him. The hum was growing louder, deafening. The whole building shook. A sound like splitting metal filled the air, followed by something worse, cracking, like glass shattering. I didn't need to ask what it was. The sky was breaking. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was in my bones. The old man grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "Listen to me," he shouted. "You've seen too much. You've heard too much." His voice was frantic. "You have to focus. You have to fight it." I tried. God, I tried. But something was pulling me. Not just my mind, my body. Felt like my skin was unraveling. Like something was reaching for me, dragging me toward it. And the worst part? I wanted to let it. I wanted to see. 3:38 a.m. The final message. Then, through the roaring hum, through the pulling and the unraveling and the tearing of reality itself. The emergency alert system crackled to life, and this time the voice was different. Not robotic, not inhuman. A woman, shaky, terrified, real. This is the final emergency broadcast. Her voice trembled. Do not look outside. Do not listen to them. Do not acknowledge them. The hum wavered. If you have already seen it, if you have already heard it. She paused. A silence stretched over the airwaves. Then, it is too late for you. The radio cut out, and in the moment of silence that followed, something knocked on the window. 3:39 a.m. Something is here. I went rigid. The old man's grip tightened on my arm. Don't move, he whispered. I barely breathed. Another knock. Slow. Deliberate. I felt it watching. It was outside, but not outside the building. Outside everything. I could sense it, just beyond the thin layer of reality that kept us apart. And it was trying to get in. A soft scraping sound. My breath caught. It was dragging something sharp along the boards covering the window. The old man pressed a finger to his lips. And then, a voice. Not from the radio, not from my mind, from outside the window. Elliot. My stomach dropped. It knew my name. Look at me. The whisper was so gentle, so familiar, like a childhood memory. A voice I had once known long ago. And for a split second, my body moved on its own. The old man shoved me back. Don't listen, I gasped, snapping back to reality. The whispering stopped. A long silence stretched between us. Then, a final knock, and just like that, it was gone. 3:45 a.m. What comes next? For a long time, neither of us moved. The hum had faded. The knocking had stopped. The thing outside, whatever it was, had left. Or maybe it was still watching, waiting. The old man finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You've seen it now, I swallowed. Yeah, you can't leave. A cold weight settled in my chest. I already knew that, because even though the hum had stopped, even though the sky had gone back to normal, I could still feel it, watching, waiting, and I knew, deep in my bones, this wasn't over. Not for me, not ever. The silence wasn't real. It felt heavy, manufactured, like the world was holding its breath, like something was still here, watching, waiting. The old man released his grip on my arm, his face pale, his eyes hollow. It's not gone, he muttered. I swallowed hard. What do we do now? He didn't answer, because outside, the radio crackled back to life, and the emergency alert tone played one more time. 3:46 a.m., a message from the end of the world. The old man and I froze. The radio had been dead for minutes. No hum, no signal. But now, the robotic voice had returned. Emergency alert system activation. This is not a test. My pulse spiked. Updated directive incoming. Updated? The old man's fingers tensed. The voice continued, but something about it was wrong, like it was glitching. Do not look at the sky. Static. Do not acknowledge. A sharp burst of white noise. Then a new voice. Not robotic. Not human. Something else. They can hear us now. I jerked back. The old man reached for the radio, but before he could shut it off, the voice spoke again. It is inside you now. A cold wave of nausea rolled over me. I turned to the old man. What the hell does that mean? His face was ashen. There's nothing left to warn you about, he whispered. My stomach dropped. I understood what he meant. The alerts had been there to protect us. They had given us rules, warnings, instructions on survival. But now they weren't trying to save us anymore, because it was already too late. 3:50 a.m., the survivors. A low, distant rumble shook the ground. It wasn't thunder. It was something deep, something old. The old man stood abruptly. We need to go. My mind was still reeling. Go where? We can't leave the town. Remember? The roads, not the roads. His eyes were dark. Underground. I hesitated. What's down there? He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a flashlight, slung a rifle over his shoulder, and threw open the door. I followed him into the empty street. The town looked different. The air was thick, too still. The sky too black. The stars weren't just gone anymore. The whole night sky was a void. I shivered. We weren't alone. Not anymore. The old man moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. I stayed close. As we reached the edge of town, I spotted something moving, a group of figures, not the still, staring people from before. These ones were walking, purposeful, silent. My breath caught. "Are they survivors?" the old man muttered. I felt a flicker of hope. We weren't the only ones left. But as we got closer, I noticed something was wrong. The way they moved, not hurried, not frantic. They were too calm, like they weren't afraid anymore, like they had already seen. The old man tensed. "Don't get close," he warned, but it was too late. One of them looked at me, and I froze. Their eyes, black, empty, not like shadows, not like blindness. They were holes, gaps in existence where eyes should have been. And yet, I felt them watching. One of them smiled. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" A sharp pain split through my skull. My vision blurred. I staggered, gripping my head as whispers crawled into my mind. The old man grabbed me. "Run!" 3:55 a.m. The descent. We sprinted toward an abandoned building. The old man shoved open a rusted door, dragging me inside. I stumbled forward, gasping for breath. The whispers were still in my head. "Look up. It won't hurt anymore. We see you." I clenched my teeth. They weren't mine. The old man slammed the door shut and locked it. Then he turned to me. "You're hearing them, aren't you?" I nodded, shaking. "How do I make it stop?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he grabbed an old rug, pulled it back, and revealed a trapdoor. "Down here." I hesitated. "What is this place?" He gave me a grim look. "The last safe place in Riverview." Then he lifted the hatch and we climbed down into the dark. 3:58 a.m. Below the town. The underground tunnel was cold. The air smelled like damp earth and rust. The only light came from the old man's flashlight. The deeper we went, the quieter it became, like the whole world was fading away. I swallowed hard. "What is this place?" He didn't look at me. "An old bunker. Built after the first time this happened." My stomach twisted. "The first time?" He nodded. "We thought it was over back then. Thought it wouldn't come back." He shook his head. "We were wrong." The walls trembled. Somewhere above us, something shifted. The old man picked up the pace. We reached a heavy metal door. He unlocked it with shaking hands and pushed it open. Inside were more people, a dozen or so huddled together, some whispering, some staring blankly at the wall. Survivors. For a moment I felt relief. Then I noticed something else. A radio. It was on. The emergency alert tone was playing again, and the robotic voice said, "This is your final warning." The old man's face went white. The radio crackled. "Elliot." I went cold. It had spoken my name. The whispers surged in my mind, louder, desperate. "We see you. We see you. We see you." And then the bunker lights went out. Pitch black. The bunker lights had died, plunging us into a thick, suffocating darkness. But I wasn't afraid of the dark. I was afraid of what was inside it, because the whispers were still in my head, and the emergency alert system had said my name. "Elliot." The radio crackled again, the robotic voice glitching. "This is your final warning." The whispers inside me surged. "You see us. Now we see you." 4 a.m. The darkness stirs. I barely registered the panicked voices around me. The other survivors in the bunker were whispering, scrambling for flashlights, trying to relight lanterns. The old man gripped my arm in the dark. "Stay close," he hissed. I nodded, but I wasn't fully there, because something was shifting in the blackness. Not the survivors, something else. The air felt thicker, like something was pressing down, squeezing the oxygen out of the room. A low, distant hum vibrated through my bones. Not from the radio, not from outside. It was coming from inside my head. And then, a soft tapping against the metal bunker door. "Knock, knock, knock." The room went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. We were all listening. Then, something whispered from the other side of the door. "Let us in." A woman let out a muffled sob. Someone else shuffled backward. The old man tightened his grip on me. "Do not answer." I clenched my jaw, focusing on his words, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that something was watching me in the pitch black. The whispers in my mind didn't stop. "We are already here." 4:02 a.m. The bunker is compromised. A flashlight finally clicked on. Its weak beam illuminated the bunker, dusty shelves, rusted metal walls, a group of terrified survivors. The old man's face was pale. "We have to go," I frowned. "Where? There's another way out." A woman nearby shook her head. "We can't go back up there." The old man turned to her. "We can't stay here either." Another survivor, a bearded man in a torn flannel, clenched his jaw. "Why not?" I swallowed. "Because it already knows we're here." As if in response, the knocking started again, faster, harder. Boom, boom, boom. The metal door dented inward. Someone screamed, "Move!" The old man barked. The survivors scrambled as he led us toward a back corner of the bunker. He kicked aside an old crate, revealing a rusted hatch. "This leads to the old tunnels," he said. "Hurry!" The door behind us let out a loud groan. The metal was bending, tearing. I didn't wait. I shoved the hatch open and climbed down into the dark. 4:05 a.m., beneath Riverview. The tunnels were narrow and cold, carved into the stone beneath the town. The air smelled damp, tinged with something metallic. The old man dropped down beside me, followed by the others. A final screech echoed above, the sound of the bunker door giving way. Then silence. I turned to the old man. "What now?" He exhaled slowly. "We keep moving." So we did. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading us deeper beneath Riverview. The further we went, the heavier the air became. The whispers hadn't stopped. They had gotten louder. "You are so close now. See what we see. Become what we are." I clenched my fists. I wouldn't listen. Couldn't. Then up ahead, a faint light. We weren't alone down here. 4:10 a.m., the chamber. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber, and at its center, a crack in the air. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't a doorway. It wasn't a portal. It was a tear, like reality itself had split open. And on the other side, they were waiting, the things behind the sky. I staggered back. The shapes, the shifting, writhing figures, I knew them. I had seen them before, through the sky, through the whispers. They had always been here, waiting, watching, and now the crack was widening. The hum in my skull turned into a full roar. "Step through, see everything, become one of us." The bearded man beside me gasped. He stepped forward, eyes glassy, reaching for the crack. The old man shot him. The gunshot echoed through the cavern. The man collapsed, gasping. The old man grabbed my shirt. His eyes were wild. "You have to fight it." I struggled to focus. "How do we stop this?" His grip tightened. "We can't." I froze. The old man looked at the widening crack. His voice was low, strained. "This isn't the first time the sky has broken, and it won't be the last." I didn't want to believe it. "There has to be a way to close it." He shook his head. "You don't understand." He looked me in the eyes. "The emergency alerts weren't to protect us." I felt my blood run cold. "They were to delay us." The hum peaked. The crack split open. And for the first time, I saw what was on the other side. I understood. The truth was never about avoiding the sky. The truth was that we were never supposed to exist at all. And now, they were taking us back. The crack in reality was splitting open, widening by the second. Something was coming through. The hum in my skull was unbearable now, vibrating through my bones like a scream I couldn't hear. The whispers had turned into a roar, a chorus of voices speaking over each other, overlapping, merging, and they were all speaking to me. "Come home. You were never meant to stay. Step through." I staggered back. My vision swam. The crack was growing, unraveling the space around it like torn fabric. The darkness inside it wasn't empty. It was alive. Something huge stirred beyond the threshold, shifting in the void. A shape without form, a presence without substance. It wasn't light or shadow. It was the absence of both. The old man was yelling something, but I couldn't make out the words over the sound in my head. I tried to focus on him, on the others, on anything real, but my body felt wrong. Like I wasn't entirely here anymore. Like I was being pulled apart. The crack had widened enough that the cavern walls were beginning to distort, bending inward, dragged toward the rift. The other survivors were screaming. Some were frozen, staring into the abyss with vacant eyes. Others were crawling away, trying to resist the pull. And the emergency alert system was still playing from the radio we'd brought with us, repeating the same message in its dead robotic voice. This is your final warning. 4:12 a.m., the choice. I fought to keep my footing, blinking rapidly. My hands were shaking. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I had to focus. I had to. The old man grabbed me. "Listen to me," he shouted over the deafening hum. I blinked at him, disoriented. "You can still fight it." I shook my head. I don't understand. What is this? What's happening to me?" His grip tightened on my shoulders. "They're trying to take you back." A chill crawled down my spine. I swallowed hard. "Back where?" His eyes darkened. "Wherever you came from." I froze, because deep down I already knew. I wasn't supposed to be here. I had never been meant to exist. And now they were fixing the mistake. The emergency alert system wasn't trying to warn me. It was trying to contain me, keep me from remembering, keep me from seeing. But I had looked anyway, and now the world was correcting itself. The hum grew louder. The crack widened again. The old man's face twisted in pain. "You have to fight it, Elliot." I clenched my fists, my head pounding, the whispers pushing and pulling at my mind. I had a choice. I could resist, or I could step through, go back to where I came from, go home. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the pull with everything I had. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to disappear. I didn't want to. And then suddenly I remembered. 4:14 a.m., the truth. It hit me all at once. Flashes of something else, somewhere else. I saw a place that wasn't a place. A world without form, without time. A void filled with endless, shifting things. And I had been one of them. I wasn't human. I never had been. I had slipped through a crack in reality a long time ago, when the veil between worlds had been thin, when Riverview had been nothing but a quiet little town under a too bright sun. I had taken a shape that wasn't mine, forgotten what I was, lived among them, until now, until I looked into the sky and remembered. The whispers weren't attacking me. They were calling me home. And if I stepped through, the crack would close, the world would heal, everything would go back to the way it was before me, before the mistake. The old man was still shouting, but his voice sounded distant now. I looked at the widening crack. I understood. I knew what I had to do, and yet I hesitated. 4:15 a.m., the final step. The others were screaming as the pull intensified. The cavern was collapsing. The void was growing. The emergency alert repeated one last time. "This is your final warning." The old man's eyes locked onto mine, pleading, but I already knew my decision. I turned toward the crack, took a step forward, and then I let go. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sound stopped, the whispers faded, the hum vanished. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything was silent, and I felt weightless, like I was sinking into something vast, something endless, something that had always been waiting for me to return. I turned back one last time, saw the old man watching me, his expression a mixture of grief and understanding. The crack began to close, the emergency alert cut out, and then the world snapped shut, and I was gone. The crack in reality sealed shut. For the first time in hours, maybe days, Riverview was quiet. The bunker was gone. The tunnels were gone. The cavern, the survivors, the old man. Everything had been swallowed by the dark, and I was no longer there. 4:16 a.m., the aftermath. Sheriff Grant had been awake when it happened. He hadn't slept in almost 2 days. Not since the sky had started whispering. Not since the warnings had begun. Now, as he sat at his desk in the Riverview Sheriff's office, staring at the radio that had been playing the emergency alert system on repeat, it stopped. A sharp burst of static, a final flicker of garbled noise, then silence. The sheriff's gut twisted. He stood slowly, stepping toward the window. The night outside was still, too still. The darkness had an unnatural weight to it, like a heavy fog that wasn't really there. He grabbed his flashlight, hand tense on the grip. Outside, Riverview looked the same as it always had. The empty main street, the neon glow of the diner sign, the gas station at the corner, still flickering its dim fluorescent light. But something felt wrong, like something had changed, or something was missing. The sheriff's radio crackled. "Grant," it was Deputy Owens. His voice sounded off. Grant pressed the button. "Go ahead. We got a situation." The sheriff frowned. "Where?" Pause. "Then everywhere." For 30 a.m., the town that forgot. By the time Sheriff Grant stepped outside, the sky was normal again. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the stars were clear, twinkling overhead. No more static hum, no more whispers, no more shifting light. Whatever had been happening, it was over, but something still wasn't right, because people were waking up, not groggy, not confused, just normal, like nothing had happened at all, like they had no memory of the alerts, the warnings, the panic. The entire town had forgotten, except for him and a few others. Deputy Owens looked pale, gripping his radio like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. "You remember, don't you?" Grant asked him. The deputy nodded, face tight. But as the morning wore on, it became clear. Almost no one else did. It was like Riverview had been reset. The missing people, no one noticed. The sky splitting open, no one remembered. The bunker, the tunnels, the creatures, gone. And Elliot, there wasn't a single trace of him left. Not in the police database, not in town records, not even in people's memories. It was like he had never existed. 7 a.m., A Town rewritten. Sheriff Grant spent the next few hours trying to make sense of it. But there was no sense to make. The sun rose as usual. People went about their day, laughing, talking, working, like nothing had ever happened, like they had always been this way. The missing buildings, the missing people, it was like Riverview had been rebuilt around the absence. A world corrected, a mistake erased, and only a handful of them knew the truth. Grant rubbed his temple, exhaustion pressing down on him. He glanced at Deputy Owens, who still looked shaken. "You okay?" The deputy hesitated. "I don't know." Grant exhaled slowly. "You get any sleep?" "No." A pause. Then, "I keep thinking, if we hadn't remembered, would it have mattered?" Grant didn't have an answer to that, because maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe it was better not knowing. Better not remembering that something had gone wrong with reality. That something wasn't supposed to be here. That something had to be removed. 8:45 a.m. The last emergency alert. Sheriff Grant was just about to convince himself it was over. That whatever had happened had passed. That the world had fixed itself. Then the radio crackled to life. A burst of static. A voice, garbled, distant, whispering through the frequency. For a second, he thought it was just noise. But then he heard it, and his blood ran cold. A final warning. Just 2 words, spoken in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the other side of something vast. A voice that sounded like Elliot. "Don't look." The radio cut out, and the sky, for just a fraction of a second, flickered, like something was still watching, like something hadn't fully gone away, like the mistake wasn't completely erased. Not yet, maybe not ever.